I'm the president of the League of Women Voters of North. A little bit about us, for those of you who are new, who haven't been here before. We are a nonpartisan organization. We never support or oppose candidates or political issues, but that doesn't mean that we are apolitical. We take strong actions on a range of policies and particularly of public interest. Some of the recent ones, if you are familiar with League of Women Voters US, we've joined civil rights groups in an amicus brief to urge the Supreme Court to strike down Trump's birthright citizenship executive order. That was at the end of February. Also, we have the League of Women Voters of Kentucky and other civil rights groups that filed a motion to protect sensitive Kentucky voter data from the Department of Justice. So there's a lot of litigation and advocacy work that the League does. These programs that we sponsor on a monthly basis here are done under a different part of our organization through our educational fund, part of our 501c3. With that, I want to remind everybody today, any discussions or questions, again, we do need to maintain that nonpartisan, sort of aura, that we have for all of the questions for our people who are here. And I know we have a lot of people that are probably campaigning. Just a reminder, that we need to keep that off the table during today's conversation. As far as, pull this back up, sorry guys. Upcoming events. If you haven't already signed up for our newsletter, there's a list in the back to please sign up for that. We have information posted on our website as well as in the newsletter, but a couple of upcoming events and opportunities that are open to all. You don't have to be a member. And we're very welcoming to men and women, even though it's the League of Women Voters. But there's a No Kings protest, one in Kingsport on March the 28th. Christina Runciman is here, is helping organize. If you have any questions about that at the end of the conversation or the end of the presentation today, you can see, her Christina to see if you can volunteer for anything. But we will have a presence there with registering voters. Lunch with the League, we also have on April 9th. We try to circulate this for people to just have informal conversations, still maintaining our nonpartisanship nature. But it's been some really, really good discussions that we've had at those lunches. The next one coming up is April 9th at Evelyn's Kitchen Table in Kingsport. The last one was in Bristol. There's an RSVP information in there. We would like for you to RSVP so we have sufficient room, but that will also be in the newsletter. Our April program will be April the 19th, the next one after this one, also at 2 o'clock. It's mobilizing young voters to build a resilient democracy. So watch the newsletter, please, and some of our social media, to keep up to date on those details. Now, a little bit of housekeeping. We do live stream, as you see, these events, and then we post them later to our YouTube channel. Only the speaker will be in view of the camera, but if you have a very distinctive voice, just remember that somebody might recognize your voice when you're asking questions. Restrooms are in the back, behind us at the counter right there. There are refreshments. Please help yourself. Donations are always welcome because about a third of our budget goes toward this facility and the refreshments that we provide for those monthly meetings. Please take home, there's handouts, there's pens, there's some information on some advocacy that, including still maybe a little bit late, but some information on the SAVE Act that's still in debate, I guess. But there's some information, some handouts there. If you'd like to take those, please feel free to. Come at 1:30 in April. Hopefully we won't have technical difficulties next time, and we'll have time to actually visit and build some community. So with that, I'm going to turn it over. We have an excellent speaker today. I am interested in, okay, sorry Sharon, I'll speak up. I'm interested in learning a little bit more about how our county and municipal, but primarily our county, offices work. Starting to get involved in that, so we have an excellent source of information for that. I'm going to let our Vice President, Ramsey McGowan, introduce him and our moderator for today. Thank you guys for coming.
Hi everyone, welcome, I'm glad you're here. Our program's set up today in sort of two parts. Our primary speaker, Mr. David Farnor, will present some preliminary information, and then we'll have a moderated conversation that will be facilitated by Nathan Farnor. Nathan is a 2018 graduate of ETSU in political science and communications. He's currently in the position of Community Engagement Specialist. He's been appointed in 2023 to the State of Tennessee's Volunteer Tennessee Commission by Governor Lee. He's very active in civic engagement projects through ETSU Votes. He's a member of the Go Beyond the Classroom Community Engaged Learning Enhancement Plan leadership team, and he has chaired the Young Professionals of Johnson City. So he's very involved and a wonderful resource, and we thank him. So he'll be coming up after Mr. Connor speaks. Mr. Connor is the Executive Director of the Tennessee County Services Association. This is an umbrella association that represents all 95 county mayors, executives, and county commissions that is dedicated to improving county government and representing the interests of counties before the General Assembly. Prior to coming to the Tennessee County Services Association, he was the Executive Director of the Tennessee County Commissioners Association, and before that, he worked as a member of the legal staff of the UT County Technical Assistance Services, and has been an elections attorney for the Secretary of State. He received a bachelor's degree in political science from Rhodes and a law degree from Vanderbilt. He's driven up from Nashville to provide this very informative and factual educational program about how county government works. We have some handouts on the table for people to share. He'll be presenting information that may not directly correspond, but this is background information for you to use to understand a little bit about county government as he begins talking and educating us even more about it. So Mr. Connor, thank you so much for being here.
Let's see if I can figure this out. All right. Can you hear me back there?
Yes.
Everybody all right? Very pleased to be here with you all. I was honored to get the invitation to come up and talk about this. I work in a strange niche area, working with county governments, and I've ended up doing that most of my career. A lot of people, it's kind of like county government is sort of an afterthought. But it's critical and it's important. It's a very rewarding area of government to work with. And I'm going to look up front. If I start wandering away from the camera, just kind of shoo me back in or shepherd me in. So I want to start though a little bit differently. It's a very, very pleased to be here. I have a lot of respect for the League of Women Voters and what you all do as an organization. Our Tennessee County Services Association is also a nonpartisan association that was created to help promote better county government. So I appreciate that idea, talking about several of these disclaimers that came out at the beginning and were being live streamed on there, and please try not to get too partisan in all your comments. I mean, we know we're living in a very heated, very polarized political environment. I hope we can just have a very candid, open conversation. I want to provide you with some information that maybe helps you understand what your county is and what it does for you, what it doesn't do for you. But with the League of Women Voters in particular, thinking about this organization and your mission, I know this part of the state is huge in history. Anybody here know who Elizabeth Willing Powell is? Maybe?
I've heard the name. I could not tell you what she did.
Have you ever heard, there was a question supposedly asked of Benjamin Franklin at the end of the Constitutional Convention when he came out. This woman, they said, called out to him and said, well, Dr. Franklin, what kind of government do we have? Do we have a monarchy or do we have a republic? And the quote is that he said, you have a republic, madam, if you can keep it. And that apparently was Elizabeth Willing Powell. There's the history is a little convoluted as to whether that's really who she was. She was a very wealthy socialite in Philadelphia, the wife of the mayor. She's considered to have been a confidant of George Washington, was one of his friends and confidants who helped encourage him to take a second term of office. So a very influential woman who would hold like intellectual salons in her home and do everything else. But you think about the fact, this is the 1780s. Women wouldn't have a right to vote in this country for almost 140 years. But she was influencing things. She was trying to do what she could, and Franklin's like, you all have a republic if you can keep it. for much of our lives, I don't know that we ever really doubted, like, oh, is the United States as a structure going to be doing okay? Is it going to be doing just fine? There's more tensions and there's more pressures on our structure of government right now than I feel like I've ever seen before. So we're in a really interesting moment in history, and we happen to be here in the community room of the Food City in Johnson City, Washington County, Tennessee, state of Franklin Road, out here, named after, I think, Benjamin Franklin. If the state of Franklin had been formed, it was going to be named for him. In Tennessee, in the United States, and you start thinking about, out of all that laundry list I just read off, the Food City Community Room in Johnson City in Washington County and the state of Tennessee and everything else, what words in there are actually critical to human survival? If anybody wants to throw one out, you can. Food, yes, food is one. And I heard somebody else say one.
Community.
Yes. We need those too. We don't have to have leagues, we don't have to have associations, we don't have to have cities, we don't have to have counties, states. I mean, there's places in this country that don't operate under all those different things. We need community, and I wish that's what we could get back to. I'm going to grab my water. And we are going to get to county government in a second. But fundamentally, what I feel like government needs to be doing is being sort of the organizational institution for figuring out how a community gets the services it needs. There's a lot of history of that up here when the Watauga Association was formed up in this part of the state, and when the people living here in Washington County, that used to be one of the western territories of North Carolina, and then there was frustrations like, we're not getting the services we need out of the North Carolina government. Maybe we need to form our own state. They tried to make the state of Franklin. You all know the history up here better than I do. It's been about people in a community saying, how do we get the services our community needs? That's where I wish we could get our conversation back to at local government, state government, federal government in our country. It's like, how do we organize our communities so that people can advocate for what they need for their community? So, county government's very rewarding to work with from my perspective. It covers the entire state. There's 95 counties, 3 of them are technically metropolitan governments that have consolidated with their cities. Everybody in the state of Tennessee lives within a county. A little different in Virginia. If anybody has lived there, or over there, if you're living inside the city limits, you're outside the county. If you're living out in the county, you're not in the city limits. But here, the cities are all located within the county. So there's a certain level of services that your city governments perform for you, a certain level that your county performs for you, things that the state does, so on from there. Since really 1978, our county governments, for the most part, all have the same structure. We've got an elected county mayor or executive. That's somewhat unusual across the country. What's more common is to have a county manager form of government, where you've got a commission that then hires a professional manager. But we elect like an elected chief executive, then we elect the legislative body. You got a sheriff, you got a trustee, a register of deeds. We also, our organization represents the highway officials. I want to make sure I give them credit. They're a big part of our organization as well, and they do some great work out in the communities, providing transportation infrastructure and public works. So the thing about county government, it's very decentralized. And that's one of the fundamental things you have to understand about it. Your county clerk is elected and answers to the voters. Your county trustee is elected and answers to the voters. Your county mayor, your county, everybody's independently elected. To the extent that they work together, it's usually a matter of good fundamental leadership skills with the folks being willing to collaborate and work together. We see that in some counties when there's been a rift. Everything starts breaking down, they can't get anything accomplished. So I'll say this, and I don't think our county mayor is here from Washington County. Mayor Grandy had said he might stop by, but a lot of times they get all the complaints from everybody about what's going wrong in the county, and half the time they can't do anything about the sheriff's office, so they can't control the highway department, they can't control whatever, but they're out there. In terms of services that are provided, county government budget is the largest portion of that goes to fund K-12 education. They do that in partnership with the state of Tennessee. The state's got a funding formula that determines how to distribute money out to the different school systems. But your county is your large funding partner here at the local government level. I know here in Washington County, you also have the Johnson City school system. Same way with Sullivan County. You have multiple city school systems over there. And let me ask real quick, how many folks here are from Washington County? Is that the majority? Any from Sullivan? A few. Any other counties represented in the region? Carter, okay. So fundamentally, you've got the education system that the counties provide. They also provide the sheriff's department, which involves your jails, your correctional system, your service of process for the court system, law enforcement provision out in the unincorporated areas. Then you have the county clerk's office that's doing business registration, motor vehicle titling and registration. You have the trustee that does collection and management of the county funds, the assessor of property who's going out and assessing everyone's property for determining of property tax. So a lot of different functions, and these individual offices are generally all elected. And you know, Mayor Grandy, I was just referencing you, and he arrived. So that's your mayor here in Washington County. So the thing I feel about it is it's fundamental critical services. K-12 education, it's usually also solid waste. It's the jails, the court system. It is your counties, although the county itself may not provide it, they've got a responsibility for ensuring that there's ambulance service. There's also emergency management, disaster response, things like that. A lot of key fundamental functions that are needed. Some counties, and it depends upon the size and the area and your population concentration. They may dabble more in parks and recreation and a few things like that. Those tend to be more municipal functions. And so then your municipalities, where you've got the greater concentration of population living together, that gets more into your police, your fire. They also may, like a lot of the cities do up here, provide school systems and also have educational systems like that. That's a choice. Most cities do not provide education, but there's a lot of that up in this region of the state. The typical county budget, the largest source of revenue is property taxation. Second to that would be sales taxes. Local option sales tax that's levied in Tennessee generates, it can range up to as high as a 2.75% rate on your local sales tax. So if you're paying something, you're paying 9.75%, 7% of that is state, 2.75% is your local. Half of that is dedicated to go to the school systems. The other half goes to the location where it was collected. So if you're buying food here at the Food City, you're paying 9.75% on an item. I know some of it's at a lower rate. Your local option sales tax, half of that's going to the school system, half of it's going to the municipality here. If you're making purchases out in the unincorporated parts of the county, that second half goes to the county. So counties are heavily dependent upon property taxes. I said other than Sevier County, which is where Gatlinburg and all that is, the other 94 counties across the state, the largest source of revenue is property tax. Then you go into sales tax. That constitutes the bulk of most counties' budgets. Then you get into hotel, motel taxes, wheel taxes, a few other items like that. But really nothing else generates local revenue like those two do. Counties also get federal funding, but it's a smaller percentage of their budget overall. They also get a lot of funding from the state, but some of that depends upon really the wealth of the local tax base. If you're a community that there is a lot of business activity, there's a lot of commercial activity, you get less support from the state than if you're a rural area that has a very low tax base and a very low property and a very low sales tax base. So local governments are to a large degree dependent upon the property tax, and I know that's an issue that there may be some questions about later on, that there's a lot happening with our state. That property tax in Tennessee is a tax right now that's reserved for local governments. There is no state property tax. There is something you may have seen something about, that's a constitutional amendment going in the ballot to ban a state property tax. We used to have one prior to the state sales tax, and it hasn't been on the books now since really the 1940s or 1950s. So that's a source of revenue the state isn't really using. This referendum would say that the state shouldn't use that in the future, and would put that into the Constitution and leave it reserved for local governments. You also may have heard about legislation that we've been dealing with a lot through our association in Nashville.
Your speech is going together.
Oh.
It's hard to understand. Could you speak a little louder?
Sorry about that. I think my mouth was getting dry. Let me check that. Is that better too?
Everything helps.
Okay. Maybe should have. It's going to create feedback if I do both of them. So that's some of the revenue stream and the revenue mix that goes into funding these local services. As I was mentioning, there's a lot of talk at the state level about doing some things for the state to control property taxes. And essentially part of the life of county government is that even though counties and especially Washington County up here. It existed before the state of Tennessee was even created. So it pre-existed Tennessee, pre-existed really our current federal government before the U.S. Constitution was enacted and everything else. But counties are dependent upon state laws and the state legislature. They lay out the structure of how counties operate, what they can and can't do, what they're required to do, what they're not allowed to do. So right now there are a lot of proposals in the General Assembly in Nashville talking about how should local governments be able to utilize their property taxes. Do we need to place limits upon that, place limits upon how much it can go up, on how properties are appraised, and the General Assembly can make changes to a lot of that. They have the authority to do that. The Constitution lets them delegate taxing authority to counties, but then they can make a lot of changes as to how that functions and operates. So, the other thing that our General Assembly does a lot of is they dictate things in terms of how the services are provided. They set out requirements and make changes in the state law on what the minimum salaries can be for teachers, what salary increases go into teachers' budgets and the school system. So you've got an entity in Nashville that can make decisions both to say we're going to take your largest item of your budget, your salaries and benefits for teachers, and we're going to require you to raise that. But on the other hand, now they're looking at making decisions about saying we want to look at your property tax revenue and cap on how much you can go up with that. So it creates a lot of pressure and a lot of difficulty for local governments to figure out how to balance their budget. We've done an analysis of a typical county budget, and roughly 65 to 70% of that for most counties is under something called a maintenance of effort requirement. So the state law says whatever local revenue sources you're putting into your county school system, you have to maintain that. You can't cut it. The state's giving you additional money each year, but for you to receive that, you can't cut any of your local funding. With the sheriff's office, there's a provision in the law that says that sheriff's departments, counties cannot cut the personnel line item or the number of personnel for a sheriff's office without the approval of the sheriff. For county highway departments, they get a lot of funding from the state through the share of the gas tax, but there are provisions in that say whatever local revenues you provide at the county level to the county highway department, you have to maintain that same level of funding in order to receive the gas tax without it being reduced. There's also requirements on the election commission, on the library, on the 911 board, on the county mayor's office, on just so many different things that the state has said, we're not going to allow you to cut that. You have to at least maintain the same level of funding. When you get down and look at after that, after your capital, which tends to be around 14 or 15% for a typical county, you got to pay your capital debt off if you borrow to build a school or to repair bridges and things like that. And then you get into things like you have to provide the county clerk's office, the circuit court clerk's office, the clerk and master's office, all these different functions that are statutorily required. It gets down to somewhere between 5 to 10% of a county budget that really the commission has much discretion about. They can decide how quickly they want it to go up, but what they can actually say, we just want to eliminate this and not do it anymore, there's very little. And a lot of those are fundamental things. Ambulance service is something that the county has to ensure there is an ambulance service, but they don't have to fund and provide it. Similarly, the level of funding for things like emergency management services, which everybody would think is critical, it's not under a statutory mandate on how much you provide, but you all know that it's needed. So the counties are providing a lot of fundamental services in your community. They're governed, and a lot of the decisions about the funding for all of that obviously all flows to the county commission. County commissions are structured a little differently from place to place. Our Constitution says it shall not be more than 25 members. The state law says it's a minimum of 9 up to a maximum of 25. That actually makes our county commissioners a little larger than a lot of other states. It's typically they're smaller than that. Some counties have been working recently to bring down and reduce the size of their county commission just because of challenges in getting good qualified candidates willing to run. So I think Washington County, Mayor, you reduced your number of commissioners a few years back, maybe the last census provision, to 15. And here there are 15 commissioners out of 15 districts. For those of you in Sullivan County, it's 24 out of 11 districts. And you may be thinking, how does that math work? It's interesting up there because some of the districts have 1, some have 2, and some have 3 based upon the population size of the district. So it's structured a little differently. We had a county a couple of election cycles back that had 18 county commissioners, 6 districts with 3 for each district. And after the election was over, there was a district where only 2 people even bothered to qualify to get on the ballot. So at the end of the election, as soon as it was over, they had a vacancy. And after that, it went back on the ballot again coming up in the November election. You had a kid who, in the meantime, turned 18 years old, who was in high school. And he was one of those kids who was heavily involved in like local politics. He was going and he was interning at the state legislature. He was very knowledgeable and very involved. And he's like, if no one else is going to serve my county commission, I'll serve. And he ended up being, for a while, probably the youngest county commissioner serving in the state of Tennessee. And maybe, probably in the entire country. He was 18 years old. So there are some counties that have been looking at reducing their commission just because there's a lack of people interested in serving. You can imagine, it's been a difficult job. It's been a lot of times a thankless job. It's hard. So the folks that are interested in serving in local government, serving on county commissions, we see that with a lot of our membership going into this election cycle. We've, the last few cycles, seen 35 to 40% of county commissions turn over, similar with county mayors. And there's a lot of county mayors retiring this time from office that aren't going to run again. So this is, as was mentioned earlier, this is kind of a critical time for understanding about county government. The election, the primaries are all coming up in May, and virtually every county in the state has a county primary now for one or both parties. There are maybe 3 counties left that don't hold a primary election for county government. So that's held in May, and then the general election will be in August with a new term of office for these officials starting September 1. But typically the way our counties just realistically are right now, without getting into partisan issues, is they tend to be predominantly one party or the other. So for the most part, with counties that have primaries, whoever wins that primary election coming up in May is most likely going to be the candidate for that position. One last thing I'll mention, I guess, about the structure of the county commission seats and how they run. That you can see some differences from place to place. It's not an issue in Washington County. We have 1 commissioner per district. Some counties make some different rules though in these multi-member county commission districts, where if they've got 3 people serving one district, some counties they still have to qualify and run for like position A, B, and C. But what's more common is it's just 3 people will get elected from that district, and it's whichever the 3 highest vote getters are of the maybe 5 or 6 people that qualify. So. There were a number of questions on interesting topics that I think wanted to be discussed. If it's okay from everybody, we can shift more into the Q&A portion of this. And with our moderator, if he wants to come on up and we can start that discussion, or like I said, I'll be around if we want to have just some general questions at the end. Yes, sir.
This is the League of Women Voters. There is a Washington County Voting Commission. Is that a county commission that's funded by the state, the county? How is that? How is the voting commission procedure work, and how are the officers elected or named?
Question up front is a really good question about the Washington County Election Commission. That's separate from, has nothing to do with the League of Women Voters. It's interesting in that, so you have a county election commission, 5-member election commission that will have 3 Republicans and 2 Democrats, because the Republicans are the majority party in the state legislature now. The county election commissions are appointed by a state election commission. So that commission is appointed by an organization out of Nashville. It's also that same 3-2 balance. That election commission has the authority to hire and fire the administrator of elections. So you'll have an administrative election for each county. But the county government, it falls on the county to fund the operations of that elections office. So you have a board of commissioners who hires an administrator of elections. They're not selected at all by your local voters. They're selected by these other entities. But the county is responsible for funding the operations of the elections. There are portions of that, like the presidential preference primary, the state will refund to the county for the cost of that. If, I don't know what they do, but if Johnson City or Jonesboro hold a standalone election, municipal election that's separate from the county election times, they will reimburse the election commission for the cost of that standalone city election. But for the most part, all your voter registration functions and the operations and the day-to-day management operations of elections falls on the county to fund through the administrator who's hired by that separate board.
So the manager of the Washington County Election Commission could be someone who lives in Nashville?
His question was, could the administrator of the Washington County election system live in Nashville? Now, they're local, they're gonna be a resident here in your community, but they are hired by that local board, not by your county commissioner or county mayor.
Okay, I am, you all hear me? No. No, can you hear me? No, can you hear me? Okay, wonderful. I can't hear myself, so I'm gonna hope that you can. As shared, my name is Nathan Farnor. I have the pleasure of serving as the Community Engagement Specialist here at East Tennessee State University. Very excited to be able to moderate a little bit of a Q&A. There were some questions that you all submitted in advance that are prepared. We've tried to kind of hit some of the key topics to make sure we cover all the things that you all wanted to hear. So I'm going to go through a couple of questions with Mr. Connor, and then we'll reserve some time at the end for any questions that you may have that were not already addressed. Does that work? Very good. And Ramsey, do you want a sitting, standing? Sitting. We're being told to sit. Okay, we can sit. I can manage that. Very good. So before we get started, let me add a little bit of a caveat. We were joking. I was joking with Mr. Connor before. He's like, is this like a game show? Does he get any passes for hard questions? He does not get any passes, but I will give him a little bit of the caveat of, you heard from him share a little bit around the things that the county does and does not control, right? So there are lots of things that are very nuanced, complex issues that touch a lot of topics. There may be some questions that you all have shared with us that are directly engaged with the county, maybe indirectly or not the county at all. I will still ask them, but I am going to give Mr. Connor permission to say that's not really my area of expertise, but I'll share what I can. So just know not every question that you all ask may directly pertain to the county, but I'm going to share them anyway, and then feel free to offer some context as needed, okay? To start off, if you've been following the news here locally, they're in any community, especially here in Washington County in our region, there are always more hot button, contextual, contentious issues that counties and local governments are having to navigate, those high stakes controversial debates. We've had some locally around Bitcoin mining. We have some more recently around the BWXT depleted uranium facilities, right? So again, nonpartisan, staying out of the arguments around those topics directly. How do counties, or what have you seen counties across the state, what do best practices look like? How are they navigating hot button issues and topics to ensure that residents have an opportunity to engage in meaningful dialogue and inform some of those decisions, but in a way that isn't everybody in a commission meeting screaming at each other, per se?
Yeah, I think the common model is everybody in the commission meeting screaming at each other. We do hear from that with some county commissioners that say, it's turned into a matter where we've got local community groups upset about something, and they just show up at the meetings with their phones, and they're filming, and they're live streaming us, and they're yelling at us, and they're doing, I'll say I don't think that's entirely effective, and that's probably part of why a lot of our members are looking at leaving, that sort of more aggressive form of social media. I think good practices, obviously on any kind of topic, whether it's, I've seen the signs out here about the issue with the manufacturer and the no uranium signs, and that kind of thing that's going on here in the community. Whether it's that, or whether it's consolidation of a school, if one school is going to close down, whether it's approval of some kind of a landfill, those kinds of issues, they know it's going to be a hot button issue. There are certain things that the law requires a county to end up publishing in the newspaper when there's notices about changes. Honestly, how many people look through the classified ads anymore to look for those kind of notices? They're not out there. So I think counties that are effective on doing things are posting a lot of public information, a lot of transparency on their websites. There have been moves in recent years to make sure and require that a county commission puts its agenda out 48 hours in advance on a website at least. There are issues about requiring public comment during periods at meetings. Generally, our association has been supported in trying to work with the legislature on those things with an understanding of, not everybody can always handle that. And with some things like on the issues around public comment, we're like, let's make it where it's related to what's actually on the agenda for the meeting, or at least something that that governing body has control over, so that you don't end up with these long debates about something that's going on in Washington or elsewhere. But I think communicating on websites is what a lot of counties are doing, putting notices out there. There are officials that use social media very effectively. Especially during times of emergency response. We see a lot of people may not be able to get somewhere where they can get online, but they can look at their Facebook on their phone, or they can look at something like that. And if the county highway department, for instance, is putting out notices about, yes, these roads have been closed because of trees down as a result of that storm, or because of ice, or whatever, that's a way they can effectively communicate. But on these issues, there are certain public hearing requirements for things, whether it's the planning commission or the county commission and approving a zoning change later on, that there are opportunities for them to hear from the public. One of the things that I think is a big challenge, now maybe not so much here, but in many counties across the state, is the loss of local news media. The independent local newspaper that actually shows up and has a reporter there that's doing articles on what's going on in the city council and county commission meetings, that's a thing of the past in a lot of communities. Or if they have a newspaper, maybe it comes out once a week, and it may be delayed as far as, if they're reporting this week on what happened last week at the county commission meeting, some of the deadlines for being able to respond may be behind. So the loss of local media is a challenge. The dependence, and like I said, the state law saying publish all these notices in the local newspaper, people don't tend to go there to look for it, they're looking for the website. So the counties that I think are more effective on keeping the public informed, it's either the individual officials making good use of social media to get it out there, or it is using the county website.
Flipping that question on its head a little bit, obviously there's formal opportunities for citizens and community members to engage in those conversations. You offered some advice on what counties can be doing well. What can community members be doing well to engage around those topics with their counties?
Yeah, this is similar to the advice we give to our members when we're asking them to interact with the state legislature, is establish relationships first. If you care about things and you know there's going to be issues coming up down the road, make sure you know your county commissioners, but not just that you know them, but they know you. Same way with the county mayor, same way with your state representatives and state senators. If the first time they've ever heard from you is when you're in their face shouting at them about something you're upset about, they're probably going to be a lot less effective at listening to you. So I think establishing that relationship with your local officials in advance, whether it's sitting down having coffee with them or just introducing yourself to them. If they're out campaigning, if you've invited them to an event and they've shown up, they're usually wanting to get public exposure, they're wanting your vote, they're wanting everything else. That's the time to start having those conversations with them about, I don't want to just spend 5 minutes at my door when I'm in the middle of cooking dinner with you telling me you want to get reelected. When can we sit down and actually talk about what's going on in this community and what I care about and what matters? And if you can establish that in advance, I think then that's a lot more effective. And you may be seen as a thought leader that county commissioner says, I've got this controversial vote coming up. They're wanting us to approve this rezoning. What do you think about it? What are you hearing in the community? So I think that is an effective way of building those relationships, as opposed to just showing up in mass, yelling at people at the end of the meeting.
So transitioning a little bit to the not as exciting topics, right? The ones that don't make headlines, like the budget. How do you, any guidance or advice that you have for counties in best practices around communication and engaging citizens in the topics that maybe aren't as exciting? They don't make the headlines, right? The things that you still want engagement on, but they don't always fill a room. How do you engage people in those conversations?
Yeah, it's, I think a lot of counties have this experience of, they go to county commission meetings, they're making all these votes and these decisions about issuing debt for the building a new middle school, having to get a bridge repaired, having to deal with all these kind of administrative things that are kind of boring and nobody's there and no one shows up at the meeting. They're conducting that. I've been to county commission meetings where there's a handful of people maybe there in the audience. But then when some hot button issue shows up, suddenly people come forward. So I think there is, with items like budgeting, if there's not going to be a tax increase, there's probably not anybody showing up at a county commission meeting to hear anything about it. They don't necessarily care about it. But then in times when there is going to be an increase or there's some problem with revenues, that's when you see officials communicating more. We see a difference across the state in terms of the counties and their ability to post things out on their websites, get draft budgets up in advance, get proposals as to what's being considered. They collect that. Some are much more transparent than others about getting that all out on the websites because, to be honest, some of the counties don't have the resources. Your typical rural county doesn't have they don't have an IT staff. They don't have all these kinds of things to pull the documents together, get them posted on websites. But I think I've seen some things. I know Washington County does a good job of getting a lot of information out there. So you can see a proposed budget, and you can see the existing budget. You can see information about what proposed changes are on taxes. probably, when it comes to budgets and the less complex issues, again, it's gonna be back and that kind of thing, about getting information out, organized on websites, and in a way that people can understand. If they just post here's a 150-page document of the proposed county budget, that doesn't always get to the voters. They're not gonna pull that out and print it off and look through the whole thing. So I see some counties doing a good job of putting some summary information out there on, here's what's going into education, here's how much is going into this is what this increase of teachers' pay is costing the county as a whole, things like that.
That's what I'm hearing through every answer you've given so far. Communication, 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 whether that be digital, thinking through how to inform residents and communities better, not just doing what's easy, right, but going above and beyond. So thank you for that. Sticking with the budget items a little bit, you shared quite a bit when you were talking about kind of how the budget breaks down to the high level on average in terms of what is the schools, where revenues come from, where those monies are spent. We have several questions in that space, but I feel like you answered most of them. What I would love to touch on a little bit, and this is a topic that is very important, I think, for the folks in this room. It's very important to me. I'm from Unicoi County, so we experience this as well. 2024, of course, Hurricane Helene. Earlier this year, of course, there was the ice storms in the Nashville, Davidson County area. Budgets are great, but just like our personal checkbooks, it doesn't always go to plan. Car breaks down, flat tire. How are counties navigating, bridging those gaps when those unexpected emergencies, catastrophes, natural disasters happen?
Yeah, it can be devastating. In particular, what you're talking about with Unicoi County, they lost pretty much their entire industrial park. Carter County was up there, and they were talking about things that they had to do in order to get money out the door, because whether you know this or not, things from FEMA and TEMA, things like that disaster funding will come, but it's on a reimbursement basis. So you're having to do what you can. I mean, you can't sit back and wait. You've got to actually get out there. You've got to start fixing these buildings. You've got to start fixing the bridges, fixing the roads, putting things back, and then you're eligible for reimbursement from the federal government. Carter County, for instance, really depleted a lot of the reserves, and I'm sure a lot of the other counties in the region did as well. So they had reserves. They put those to work right away, trying to repair bridges, fix buildings, get a new school put back up. But when they do that, not only then have they emptied out their bank account, they have some earnings and they have some interest income that comes to the county that helps fund operations. So when you empty your reserves, you're not earning any interest off of those. So they not only saw the loss of income from properties that have been destroyed, so the property tax reductions, or commercial facilities that were destroyed, so you're not getting sales tax off of that anymore. Then they were spending money to try to put these things back in place, but then they're losing the interest earnings off of whatever their reserves had been. So it really hit their revenues difficult. It's very difficult for them to manage. The state legislature did step up and send a lot of revenue or put it into funds to be eligible to come here. But even with that, there's legislation being considered this year because there is a tremendous delay and a lot of burdens as far as the hoops that have to go through for TEMA to be able to issue funds back to the local governments. I was at a meeting actually in Carter County, for those of you who were here, with a number of local officials were there, and folks were there from TEMA, and they kind of pulled out this sheet of butcher paper and rolled it out across the table and said, here's the starting point, here's the ending point. So we get the request for the funding here, it can be spent at step 42 all the way at the other end. As we're going through this process, if we hit a point in like step 12 or 14 and we've got to make amendments to what this cost of this project was, we got to go back and start at the beginning. Because they were having to go all through all these similar hoops. Like if the state was putting out a contract to say we want to buy patrol cars for the Tennessee Highway Patrol, you got to go through all this bid process and all this evaluation and all this documentation for purchasing. They were treating disbursement of funds for emergency management in a similar way as far as having to go through all those steps and all those approvals. So they're working on legislation right now. A lot of folks up here, Representative Alexander is one of the sponsors out of Washington County. They're working to streamline that process. Still have plenty of oversight through the state comptroller's office to make sure that there's not inappropriate dealings with that, but like get it out the door faster and not treat it like a procurement process.
The things I know, looking at Hurricane Helene 2024 here in our region, it truly was a multi-county regional impact. How does the multi-county nature of some of these topics, we start talking about services and budgets, right? I know we had counties that were loaning equipment to other counties and services for one county, fire department going into another county. How does a regional multi-county, how does that impact some of what you're sharing?
Yeah, with mutual aid is what we call it, when they can go from one jurisdiction to another. There are provisions on the books that allow for like a county to respond and go into a neighboring county to help, whether it's the highway department, whether it's emergency management, whether it's law enforcement, whoever it may be. They can cross those county lines in times of disaster if there's been appropriate requests and responses back about we're coming in to help with that. That ties into also with, it's kind of government bureaucracy at its best. TEMA and FEMA, if you end up not having the appropriate documentation that these things were requested and a county shows up to help their neighboring county, you can't always get reimbursement for the cost of that back to the county that provided the services. So we try to do a lot, especially after an election, with bringing in folks from TEMA to do education on that process, because one of my worries has always been that we're going to have a newly elected county mayor who has a lot of emergency management responsibilities, take office in September, their county get hit with a devastating natural disaster. Well, and really, in this circumstance, is there anybody here from Hamlin County? Up there, you had, right at the exact time Hurricane Helene was hitting, the previous county mayor was retiring, and the county commission was naming his successor to come into office. He was stepping into office like literally days after that event happened, and then so all those responsibilities were falling on him. So there are definitely opportunities, and we see tremendous cooperation. A lot of times, especially with our highway departments, they'll just show up in the county the next day with equipment and crews, and they're like, we're here, we can start clearing the roads, we can start clearing trees, what do we need to do? But like I said, there's a matter of you have to go through the appropriate steps to make sure you can get reimbursed for that.
So I want to transition us a little bit to probably everyone in the room's favorite thing in the world, taxes. So we'll talk a little bit about taxes. You started speaking on this when you were talking property taxes specifically. I want to dig a little bit deeper. So of course, the Tennessee legislature has debated quite a bit recently around property tax cap, I believe at 2%. What have you heard from the county perspective? What are those core arguments for, against a cap? How would those restrictions impact the county and their ability to provide the services that you do?
Yeah, so what our General Assembly is considering this year, and it's going to be up in committees this very next week, it's got some amendments floating around it, but the idea is that whether it's county commission or a city council, they both can levy property taxes. As the proposal was initially introduced, there have been a couple of different ones out there, but the one that's moving was saying you can't set a rate that generates more than inflation plus 2% over your prior year revenue. It's been amended to say 3% in the House. We're going to see where things are going. So the idea being, if your property tax generated $10 million well, I shouldn't start doing math. I'm not an accountant by background. You can't generate, let's say inflation is 2% and they've got a 3% plus inflation. Your revenues, you couldn't set a rate that generated 5% more in revenues from your property tax than what you brought in the previous year. While 5% may sound like a pretty good cushion, many of these governmental services that you have to provide go up a lot faster than 5%. Whether it's like equipment, materials, paving, asphalt, concrete, or like I said, that the issue I've talked about a couple of times, our state has been increasing teacher salaries. They'll pat themselves in the back and say, since the last 5 years, we've increased the minimum salary for teachers from $35,000 for that entry level to $50,000 for that entry level. That's a 42% increase in minimum salary schedule for teachers. Well, that's funded in part by the state and in part by local government. So if you've raised that one item, that's the largest item of salaries and benefits for a county government, by that percentage over that number of years, you're already eating up a lot of what a 5% increase in property tax would get you. We have counties out there that have managed to go 20 years without having a property tax rate increase. There are others that have put it off too long, and then they've had to have huge ones. And I think that's what's triggered some of this reaction at the state legislature, is those residents got hit with a 25, 30, 40% increase on the property taxes in 1 year. The thing that's out there, and you'll see in a lot of the literature, of 50 states, 46 of them have some sort of a revenue cap or appraisal increase cap or something on the books that limits what local taxes can do. Tennessee is one of only 4 without a statutory limit, so your county commission technically could raise them how much ever they want to in a year. Those states are New Hampshire, Vermont, Maine, and Tennessee. New Hampshire and Vermont are up there. They're like 5th and 6th highest in the country for property taxes. Maine is about 20th, and Tennessee is like 42nd or 43rd. So I think you can look at it and argue and say, all right, these local officials have the authority to raise these taxes, but they're also gonna get punished for raising those taxes. They're gonna be known by the local community. They're not gonna increase the taxes more than they have to because there's an election coming up. So that could keep it down there low. Obviously, other states have these caps and they can operate under those caps, but in most of those states, in 39 of those other states, they have higher property taxes than we do in Tennessee. So the cap itself doesn't necessarily keep it down. There are some issues where if you put something on the books and say your revenues can go up 2% a year plus inflation, that may change and alter behavior among county commissioners to say, well, you know what, we never know when we're gonna need money, when we're gonna hit this disaster, when we're gonna hit something, so let's raise it 2% plus inflation every year, just because that's what we're allowed to do. The legislation has some requirements, or has some provisions that allow for you to go to a referendum to increase the rate if you need to go beyond that. Our concerns with that, and why we've raised objections about that referendum provision, is it says that it has to happen at a November general election, like the upcoming gubernatorial election or the presidential election. So you've got a county would have to anticipate this August what they think their tax revenues need to be for next July in order to pass a resolution to get it on the budget this November, to ask the voters to approve a tax increase that will go into effect the next year for a budget that they don't know yet, what the state's gonna mandate they do, where their revenues are gonna come in, everything else. So I think even though it's got referendum provisions in there, it would have to be more from a long-term perspective of, we're gonna go to the voters and say we need to increase revenues for some big project down the road. But the legislation also has provisions that allow them to raise taxes outside that cap for paying off bonded indebtedness. So if you have to do a big tax increase to pay the cost of a new jail or a justice center or a new high school, which can be really expensive projects, you can do that outside this cap. As a more fiscal conservative person, that worries me that we're gonna say, you can spend as much as you want on debt, we just wanna limit your spending on operations. So I think that's gonna encourage counties to start pushing more things towards debt and indebtedness, which really is adding on a cost. You've added in interest costs and issuance costs and everything else to that. Something else, I'm seeing Mayor Grandy back there, he and I have talked about this. The other thing that gets involved is just even putting these restrictions on the books, on limiting a local government's ability to access their revenue. The bonding agencies and the financial advisors are already looking at that. They're just seeing this proposed legislation and they're saying if that goes into effect, we're gonna increase your cost of issuance. Because suddenly you don't have the same access to your revenues as you used to. So we're worried about your ability to pay that debt back. So there's some aspects of this that it's obviously popular with the voters to say we're gonna cap how much your property taxes can go up in any year. That it could have the effect of, one, encouraging local governments to raise up every year just because they won't be able to have a larger increase in the future if they need it. And two, it could drive a cost of indebtedness and things like that. And it may encourage more counties to go into debt on things that right now they're saving up money and paying for as they go.
So another topic of conversation at the state level has been around the real estate transfer tax, which currently exists. A lot of counties are advocating that the state offer some revenue sharing from that tax. Can you share a little bit more about where is that in the process or in discussion, and what is it counties are really advocating for?
Yeah, so that tax, if you're familiar with it, if you bought and sold a home recently, it shows up as one of the line items at your closing. You pay a tax that's like 37 cents per $100 of value on the home. So it may be $2,000 or $3,000 on a home purchase. It gets rolled in with your closing cost. You're paying that tax right now. Most people probably think some of that's coming to their local community. It's not. It's all collected and goes to the state. Your register of deeds gets a very small commission for collecting and sending it in, but the money goes to the state of Tennessee. Portions of it get earmarked for things like parks acquisition and wetlands acquisition and a few items like that, but most of it just goes into the state general fund budget. We've been arguing to say, if this is money that people are paying in a tax on the purchase of property in a community, why don't you return half of that back to the community where it's bought and collected, so it can be invested there. We agreed to restrictions in the legislation to say it should be spent on, because it fluctuates up and down, obviously with the housing market and property sales and transfers. So we've said, we don't want to have it being spent to pay something like sheriff's deputies, because if it dips off, what are you going to do on salaries? But the local governments, counties would spend it on infrastructure And we think there's a logical reason why tying revenue from property purchases, especially when it involves development, into paying for the infrastructure that may be supporting that development. That we were hopeful of last year. It wasn't in the governor's budget last year. We were asking him to put it in this year. It didn't get in the budget again this year. So we've talked to the legislators about it, but they're kind of, the General Assembly has been somewhat generous with sending non-recurring funding back to local governments on a number of different items the last few budget years, but they're very reluctant to turn over a source of revenue that's recurring revenue for them. So we're asking for that, but it's honestly, it's looking kind of doubtful, but that's the reason why where our arguments were coming from on why we feel like that's a tax that a portion should be returned back to the community where it came from.
So you mentioned in that response, you mentioned a little bit about investment, infrastructure, and costs. Obviously, lots of growth happening in our region, across the state. You can see it just driving down the road, and we read about it on the news. There's always the immediate costs, right? You pay for a new building, you pay for a new bridge, you pay for whatever the large infrastructure investment development might be. Talk to us a little bit about what's happening behind the scenes at the county level to gauge the long-term costs and benefits of those things, right? The costs that happen in the moment to build the thing may not be the only costs, right? They're going to impact budgets going forward for years and decades. What does that look like? How are counties measuring those, and how does that influence the decision making?
Sure, I think we are seeing some of the counties getting hit hardest with growth, rapid growth, struggling to deal with that, and they would like to slow it down a bit in part, especially when it's residential growth, because many times those rooftops represent children in the school system. So it's you got new kids coming in, you got to educate them, you got to expand your school system, you got to build new schools, you got to. So if you have a subdivision going in that's bringing in 300 to 500 starter homes, you know those are likely going to be younger couples that may be having kids in the next few years, and so you could end up with 700-800 kids coming out of that neighborhood over the next few years, and those are kids that are going to have to be educated in the local school system. If your elementary school in that area is already at capacity, or maybe it's 20-minute drive away, you may have to be building a new elementary school in that area. So there's that issue. When you get into things like around the planning commission, it may be the determination of, we've got a narrow 2-lane road, and right now there's 20 homes on it, and there's a farm at the end with like 200 acres back there, and somebody bought that farm. They now want to put 150 homes back there. Well, that's suddenly going to dump a lot more traffic. Is it going to require you to widen the road? Is it going to require you to put in different safety measures or turning lanes or things like that? So counties, to a large degree, through their planning commissions or through zoning plans, they are trying to concentrate or manage development where it's going into the areas where there's infrastructure to support it. But they can't always do that, and that's where there's pressure, and we see a lot of legislation around that right now to allow more freedom for developers to be able to go where they want to go. So there's a tension there. So that's a challenge sometimes as well between city and county governments. If you've got, not so much when the city's got its own school system, but we have places out there where a city within a county that has just a county school system, they're trying to encourage development, they're trying to get it going, and they're trying to bring in new subdivisions. But every time they do that, they're adding in more burden onto the county school system.
In any practical strategies in the state that you've seen counties implement to ensure that some of those investments in infrastructure don't have some unfunded burdens years down the road?
Well, something interesting that may not be directly answering your question, but last year there was some efforts that went underway about preserving farmland. That's been a strong initiative of Governor Lee and his Commissioner of Agriculture at the time, Charlie Hatcher. We are one of the states that's losing farmland much more rapidly. I think we're dependent upon the measure of the top 2 or 3 states in the country for seeing farmland converted over to developed property. And they're worried about the impact that agriculture is still our biggest industry in the state of Tennessee. They're worried about how we can preserve that. If all prime farmland starts getting turned into subdivisions or shopping malls, obviously you can't go back and never get it back. So they instituted some things to create conservation easements that farmers could voluntarily sign up for to keep their land in conservation. They also funded something within the Institute for Public Service at UT that is a new agency called, I forget the title of it, but it's a new agency to help support local governments with planning overall. Because we had some laws that passed in the late 90s when there were a lot more conflicts between cities and counties around annexation, that mandated that communities come together, develop growth plans for where cities can annex, where they can grow, what they're gonna do. But a lot of communities created those plans back then, and then they just sat static, and they haven't been updated. And we're now over 20 years later, probably 25 years later, and they don't have that guidance. So the state saw fit to say, we're gonna fund this new agency to assist cities and counties with doing long-range planning. Some of your larger, more populous counties have, pretty sophisticated planning staff, and they can do some of those projections. But you get into some of these rural counties that are now seeing spillover growth. Southern Middle Tennessee, there's a tier of counties that didn't see much population growth for a long time, but now they're being squeezed between growth moving south out of Nashville and north out of Birmingham, Alabama. So they're suddenly dealing with growth they haven't dealt with before, and they don't have a long-range planning staff. They don't have some of the resources. They may be able to go to like their development districts for that, but this new state agency that they're looking at setting up is supposed to help them with that long-range planning.
So talking about development, you mentioned housing a little bit. Obviously, affordable housing is an ongoing topic of debate, conversation. How are mayors and county commissioners and communities reconciling the need for more affordable housing, but also recognizing, to your point, the value of property and the fact that we're losing farmland and we need more developments and so on and so forth, the age-old story. How are they reconciling that when you've got communities that perhaps are very vocal that they don't want new developments, or they don't want certain portions of their community touched? How do you reconcile the need for affordable housing with some very valid concerns from community members?
Yeah, it's challenging that you have the property rights of individuals, that Tennessee's a very strong property rights state, that have to be balanced against kind of that idea I talked about at the beginning about communities determining how they want to set up the character of their community. So there are places out there that are, you hear this all the time in Nashville. I'm afraid we're getting close to being there. Like, we don't want to be the next Atlanta. How do you prevent being the next Atlanta? Well, you're going to have to do something to control your congestion, your traffic, and your development, and your everything else. But then if you've got people that are under pressure saying, we got to get all this development in here, we got to bring down the cost of housing, it's hard to preserve land on one hand and provide more housing to bring down affordability on the other hand, unless you have more density. And a lot of people cringe immediately when you say we got to have more density of development. But there's really just, from a logical standpoint, you can't preserve land and provide more housing unless you're going to make that housing denser. And then that's when you get into the issue, though, of some communities that are like, wait a minute, we don't want to see a lot of apartment complexes all over the place. We like the idea of residential neighborhoods and yards and more traditional development. So that's a challenge. And so we definitely see a lot of legislation around that in terms of what can and can't be developed. There's a larger group of lobbyists now working at the state legislature on issues around development, from the home builder community and the developer community, that are trying to push to either get some things sped up faster, to get some greater flexibility where they can go, to get out from under some restrictions, like where a county might say, hey, if you want to develop that 200-acre farm at the end of the road, you're going to have to donate some property to help us with offsetting some of the transportation we need to put in place and things like that. So we're seeing that battle definitely in the legislature.
What tools currently exist? What tools currently exist for county governments, mayors, commissions to try to incentivize affordable housing? What's at their disposal right now?
There are a number of things that can be done to help incentivize affordable housing. Counties can kind of voluntarily enter into agreements to have some pilots to reduce the property taxes on properties that are going in. There are some things on the books that we've seen. Knox County is one of the few I've seen take up on this, but basically say they're going to help encourage developers with putting in new residential neighborhoods and development by taking on some of the debt and the burden of putting in infrastructure, so like the water and sewer lines and streets, and paying for that through special assessments on the property, so the developer doesn't have to pay the cost of all that on the front end. We've not seen that taken up a lot across the state, but there's been a couple of places that have looked at it. But then the interesting thing with that is you get back to, people are complaining about rising property taxes. If you're now saying we're going to take some of the development of private infrastructure to put in neighborhoods, and we're going to have all the people that live in that neighborhood pay for it with a special assessment that's collected along with their property taxes, you're kind of adding back into that mix again.
Very good. So transitioning a little bit, and I'm probably going to ask one or two more questions, then we're going to open it up for some Q&A. But transitioning a little bit, let me add a caveat for those in the room, and correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Connor. You do not represent sheriff's departments. Is that correct? For your organization. One of the questions, or some of the questions that folks in the room had, were around immigration, and were around a lot of the debates that we're seeing at the state and the national level around how local municipalities and counties are partnering on some of those efforts. So lots of questions in that space. Again, I know you don't represent the sheriff's department, but can you talk a little bit, share whatever update you would like to provide or context around what those conversations look like at the state level, what's happening here locally? I know some decisions have been made here locally that you may not be familiar with. Whatever you would like to share in that space. So I know there's a lot of interest.
Yeah. Immigration is probably the hottest button issue in the country right now. And I'm looking as well with my partner who happens to be here with me, who she teaches, she's a professor, this is Dr. Mila Dragojevic, she's a professor at Swanee. She teaches immigration policy and is a naturalized U.S. citizen who's an immigrant herself. So I've got multiple reasons why I've got to be delicate with my responsibility. But no, there is a lot of pressure is being put on local law enforcement to get involved and cooperate with immigration enforcement. Some of the things that passed last year, which really were new grant programs, new departments at the state to try to provide training and resources to sheriff's offices to get involved with helping with immigration enforcement. You have different levels of ways they can get involved. There are, without getting too far in the weeds, there are task force. Mostly what we see in the state is like task force involvement or warrant officer involvement. Task force is when your local police or sheriff's deputies, it's like, yeah, we're actually going to coordinate and work hand in hand with ICE agents on going out doing raids, doing roundups, doing arrests, doing immigration enforcement. Warrant officers, that gets more into the idea of, right now, if someone gets arrested, there's a responsibility. If they're in the local jail and there's an indication that it looks like they may be here illegally or undocumented, they're supposed to notify ICE. Then there's this whole process, if they're not set up as a warrant officer program, where they've got to then wait for ICE to actually come in and officially serve the information that we want you to hold that person. So there are some sheriff's offices that are signing up as the warrant officer level with ICE, just so they can say, like, we'll notify you that we've got somebody here. If you check it all out and think they are there and they need to be held, we have a person here who's that warrant officer that can actually serve that immigration detainer warrant on the person. So some sheriffs have been cooperating on that level. We see that a lot more common than the task force level because it helps them deal with the issue of we've got populations inside our jail that you're expecting us to do certain things with. Some sheriffs have looked, so there's been a huge increase in involvement in that. Prior to the last couple of years, there were maybe 2 programs across the state that were doing what they call 287G agreements with immigration authorities. Then that jumped to about 12 the next year, and then suddenly it jumped to half the counties by this point. I haven't looked at it in the last few days to see if there's more adding on. I think there's somewhere around 48 or 50 counties that have some kind of agreement with ICE right now. Some of the sheriffs are saying we're going to voluntarily sign up for that to help with some of this process because we don't want to be forced to get involved at a higher level. But there's legislation right now that's going to say we're going to take that option away. So the state legislature is looking at saying every sheriff's office is required to enter into a 287G program. And I know the sheriffs have concerns about that for a number of different reasons. So some of them are pushing back on that. That's the latest status. I believe Washington County has the warrant officer involvement, and Sullivan County, I think, did both task force and warrant officer involvement. So there's a lot of pressure is coming from the state for local law enforcement to get involved in those operations. It has been voluntary up to now, but that option may be taken away from them.
So I've got one final question, and I'm going to open it up. So if you've not thought through how to phrase your question, this is your opportunity. But for my final question, you've got some elected officials in the room, you've got community members in the room from Washington County and the larger region. Obviously, you've shared a lot. You are a wealth of information and knowledge on how county government works in the state of Tennessee, or supposed to work, because it doesn't always go quite as planned. If there's one key takeaway for the folks in the room as they go back out to their organizations, their communities, their families, What is that? What is the one key takeaway? You know, if they're advocating on behalf of the important work that's happening at the county level across the state, what is that one key takeaway?
I would go back to kind of what I started with, which was the concept of like counties themselves, cities, states, nations. None of that's necessary, but we're going to live in communities. Human beings are always going to be living in communities, and we have to figure out how we're going to do that. Personally, I'm a strong believer that I think the government that's closest to the people is the best because it's in the community. It's actually there functioning, making decisions. I think that way about like decisions about local taxes should probably be made in the community that know how those resources are going to be spent. Things around planning and zoning should be made in the community that are going to be affected by that, as opposed to either in Nashville, where, you know, out of 132 state legislators, 129 of them aren't elected by the people in Washington County or whatever your county may be. I mean, some counties have a few legislators, but the vast majority of them are not coming from your community. They don't live in your community. They don't know what it's about. Same way with Washington. When Washington's making decisions that come all the way down here that affect how things operate and are done in your local community, I think that's a mistake. So to the extent that we can talk about a community of people still being able to be the ones who determine what their life is like in their community and how they do things, how their government operates, what their tax level is, all of that, I think that's where we need to go.
Very good. Thank you for that. I think great advice to end on. So what I'm going to do, I am going to stand up so I can see the folks in the back because I know we'll have some questions. A little bit of, yes, hands. Thank you so much. See you, Carlene. You'll be my first one. I got you. So here's what I'm thinking. We've got a few minutes left. I want us to try to get through as many questions as possible for the few minutes that we have left because I know lots of you may have time. What I'm going to ask is be very thoughtful that you are asking a question as opposed to sharing a story. I sometimes do that. I want to tell him all the things in the world, right? So we want to try to answer as many questions as possible. So try to be brief with whatever your question or remark is, and we'll try to get through as many as possible, okay? Very good. And Carlene, I think I saw your hand first. So.
Thank you, Nathan. Thank you so much, sir, for driving up here. I've driven that road many times. Back in the 60s, I was in high school in South Nashville, and that was the time when Davidson County and Nashville became Metro Nashville, where they combined both city and county governments. Am I correct in my impression?
Yeah, I think it was 1963.
Yeah, very exciting. I'm wondering if there's any more activity toward that kind of approach in other parts of the state, and has this felt to be a good thing? I can tell you, going to a county high school back then, it made a huge difference, almost immediately. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the question. So yeah, we do have 3 metropolitan governments in the state of Tennessee. Nashville-Davidson County was the first. That's my hometown. That's where I grew up. I'm one of the, I think there's 12 of us now who actually still live in Nashville that grew up there. Everybody else has moved from I don't know where. But so you have Nashville-Davidson County. You have Moore County, Lynchburg, home of Jack Daniels. That has become a consolidated metropolitan government, and Hartsville-Trousdale County. So those two are opposite end of the spectrum. Davidson County is the second largest county in the state in population. Those two are among the smallest in the state. And I think it's really a matter of they didn't have the tax resources and tax base to support separate levels of government, so they combined. Occasionally we will see it in places like Montgomery County is where Clarksville is, Fort Campbell. It's got that one large municipality within a county that's taking up most of its population. They've talked about consolidating and had votes a number of times. Madison County in West Tennessee, where the city of Jackson is, they've talked about it. It tends to be a referendum that has to pass in both the unincorporated parts of the county and inside the city limits. And the folks in the city tend to vote to say, yeah, let's go ahead and consolidate. And the folks out in the outlying areas tend to be the ones who say no, so it gets shot down. So we haven't seen a successful attempt in quite a while on going to a metro form of government. I'll be honest, way out on the opposite end of the state, Lake County is in the northwest corner, very rural county, struggling financially, very low tax base. One of the things that's talked about, one of the things that's been suggested is maybe they need to look at not having some city governments and a county government operating and blending them together. That might be a little bit of a Band-Aid to reduce some of the cost of administration. There's also been talks actually about that county maybe needing to dissolve and be folded back into some other counties because it's gotten that challenging. They have very limited tax base, and it's hard for them to keep up just basic services. So we may see it in a case like that, but there's there are places that I would think it would make a lot of sense. And you asked a little bit about advantages and disadvantages as well. I think there are some of the things that Nashville-Davidson County was successful in recruiting and bringing in, things like sports teams or youth development or other matters, that when you're dealing with one local government, I think that has been easier for some of these outside groups to work with than if they come into some place and they're trying to work and they can get agreement from the city, but they can't agreement from the county, or the city and county are fighting each other over matters. So I think that's been a benefit that Nashville's experienced. And like I said, then Moore County, Lynchburg, and Hartsville-Trousdale County, it was more a matter of let's simplify things. Let's not support a city government and a county government in a very small rural area that really is providing all the same services.
Okay. I'm Michelle Treese, and I have two questions, but